Welcome to Insider Threats, when privacy, security, and identity management collide. I guess I'll introduce myself first, and then we can all take turns introducing ourselves. I'm Heidi Wachs. I'm a Vice President and Engagement Manager with Strauss Friedberg / Aon Cyber Solutions. We are a incident response and risk management consultancy, and my background is in a little bit of everything. So I joined Strauss about a year ago. Before that, I was a practicing attorney doing data privacy and cybersecurity. Before that, I was an identity management analyst with Gartner for Technical Professionals. And before that, I was a chief privacy officer. So I've dabbled in a lot of these different areas. And actually, my current role is the first to really bring all three of those disciplines together. And we're going to talk about how those three have interplay.
All right, hi everyone. My name is Marla Hay. I'm Director of Product at Salesforce. I manage our privacy and data governance products. Prior to joining Salesforce, I ran product at a company called Janrain, which does consumer identity access management. So it's been a lot of identity and privacy mixed together, and happy to be here. Thanks for having us.
Hi, Mike Borgia. I work with Heidi at Strauss Friedberg and Aon Company, and so my background is I also was previously an attorney, a practicing attorney. So I think mostly I'm more on the kind of in the orange. We'll talk about that cool Kinko's chart in a little bit, but kind of between privacy and more heavy on the cybersecurity side. I previously worked for a global consultancy doing cybersecurity, and then worked with Heidi at a law firm. We diverged and then got the band back together a few years later, doing privacy and security and other things like that.
So we're going to give a bit of a background on data privacy. We know that most of you probably are much more well steeped in identity management. Do any of you actually work in a privacy capacity or a privacy role? Show of hands. Nice. How about anybody who works more in a security role? Nice. Excellent. So maybe we'll get some strong opinions. I'm going to give you the heads up. In a little bit, this is going to turn very interactive, and we're going to force you all to participate, and including getting out of your seats and come interact with our super awesome Kinko's chart. So get ready for that. But first, we wanted to give a little bit of background on the privacy piece, because we know that that's the piece that sometimes doesn't get quite the deep dive at Identiverse and identity management and security conferences in general. So I'm going to turn it over to Mike and let him run the show on the background to privacy.
Sure, thanks. So I think everyone here, encounters data privacy, and you sort of kind of have an intuitive sense of what it is. But it's helpful, I think, even in someone who deals with it all the time, as well as security, to think about the ways in what it really means and the ways in which they're different. It's easy to think about, kind of going back to our chart. It's easy if you sort of really are deep in one of those circles to think that that's kind of the whole chart. And so when we think about privacy, and it's kind of a moving target, because what privacy is, what it encompasses, has changed and grown over the years as technology and law has changed. But when we think of privacy, you think about it as essentially asking the question around personal data. What can be done with this data? And so what we have on this slide right now are these core privacy principles. These are, you'll see these over and over again, or some version of these in laws, in industry standards, in treaties, and all sorts of places. These basic ideas will come back. And it really comes down to, you're a person, there's data about you, and giving you some choice and control over who sees the data and what is done with it, what is not done with it, et cetera. The classic privacy question, particularly in the US, is, when we think of privacy, is it private or is it not private? Or to what degree is it private? So who can see it? Is it just for one person? Is it to everybody? You could think about Facebook, like, is it just a private message? Is it like for everyone? Is it just for my friends? But the concept of privacy is really growing, and if you're familiar with GDPR, laws, you get less of the idea of privacy and more of that's kind of a subordinate concept to the broader idea of data processing, and that is really where you start to get concepts around not just who can see the data, but what can be done with it. So, for example, you might, as a consumer, you interact with a company. They can see your data. You understand that. They need your data to provide you the services. But there's another question of, okay, you can see my data. You can use that data to process my purchases or contact me for certain things. But you can't use it for analytics or for contacting me for marketing purposes. And so that's not a privacy question in the traditional sense. It's the same people who could see it, but it's a question about processing and control of who gets to do it. What we're showing you with this slide is that there is kind of a convergence around the European standard. And the European standard is what I meant around GDPR, looking not just at, and then actually I'll say this, it means a couple of things. So one is in the US, and this is pretty typical of US law, it's deep in like notice and consent. It's the idea of free actors get to make free decisions. And the role of the law in this area is just to make sure that those decisions can be made fairly and with the right information. So it would flow from that, that all you need to do as a company is to tell people what you do. And so hence you get pages and pages and pages of privacy policies that no one's ever read except the lawyer who wrote them. But that's kind of, you might call it a legal fiction. I don't mean that in a pejorative sense, but the idea is you've been told and now you can choose to interact with that product or that company or not, and it is a free choice. Europe sees things quite differently, and the world, the green arrow here is really moving much faster than the blue arrow, I think. The green arrow is really, the world is starting to take more of a European approach to this. It'll be interesting to see what England, the UK does post-Brexit if it ever happens. But the idea that there should be a robust set of controls and requirements around data, that you sort of have a fundamental right to control this data, that's in the law, and it can't be, you can't notice and choice that away. There has to be things you can do, things you can't do, legitimate reasons to process data. And the US is slowly moving in that direction as well. I mean, I think it's up for debate how much or where it will actually land, but you may have heard of CCPA, other laws at state levels being negotiated. Contrary to what you might hear, those are not like US GDPRs. They're not that broad. They're not that, they don't have as much bite as GDPR. They don't govern everything that GDPR does, but it's a change from the concept of, just as long as you're telling people what you do and you're following that, you're okay, to more of a substantive, there's things you can do, there are things you can't do, and you have to give people more power over their data, more granular power.
Yeah, I would just chime in one other thing that has been sort of part of this evolution for a long time. And still today, people often say, like, the U.S. doesn't have as good privacy as Europe does. Why doesn't the U.S. look like Europe in terms of privacy legislation? Why isn't my privacy protected in the same way? And the way that U.S. privacy law evolved was, first of all, that it was largely reactive and not proactive. So you could collect as much data as you wanted, and then if something went wrong and the data went somewhere it wasn't supposed to go, or somebody who wasn't supposed to see it saw it, you had an obligation to tell the individuals that that had happened to their data. But there's no law that says you can't, still to this day, there's no law in the first place that says you can't collect somebody's social security number or as much information as you want about them. You just have to tell them that you're collecting it most of the time, even if that. The one piece of US law that the rest of the world has decided to embrace is breach notification. So for a long time, despite the fact that EU law was drafted far more broadly and they defined personal information far more broadly, the notification regime was not what it looks like in the US to tell people that bad things had happened to their data. And under GDPR, that has significantly changed. And the green arrow with the globe, as other countries update their laws as well, and they begin to look more and more like the European model, the one piece they are plucking from the US regime and adopting is this breach notification piece.
I'd just also add that I think while it's true that it seems like the green arrow is moving much more quickly than the blue arrow, and things like CCPA are not GDPR. There are some common threads between GDPR and some of the new privacy laws we're seeing come out in states in the U.S. I think there it goes. Which is just the concept of data subject rights, and they're not the same rights, and they're not as extensive, it's not as robust, but it is a move from hey, we're just going to, as long as we tell you we're going to do whatever we want, and you're just going to accept it because you're not going to read 30 pages of notifications, to like there are now some explicit rights that end users have, and that seems like it's a trajectory that we're getting in the U.S. that is a positive change, potentially due to GDPR.
I think the last thing I'll highlight here, because it's become relevant for the rest of our presentation, is that when you think about the differences here, and sort of the one shortcut you can use is that, the U.S., you often hear, say what you do and do what you say. So you put it in a big privacy policy and then do those things and don't lie about it. And that's most of what you need to do right now, CCPA notwithstanding. In the EU, what's interesting is basically if you read the GDPR, processing personal data is unlawful. You may not process it unless you can fit your processing under one of 6 exceptions, or not exceptions, but like 6 grounds. Now that ends up being broader than it sounds, but the point is you have to justify everything you're doing according to a legitimate business interest or a contract with the data subject and things like that. And I mention that because it has really, for insider threats, it has really profound effects on employee data. Because if you think about your employees, people in your organization, it's pretty similar. You get there are some limits, but basically in the US, you get a contract or you have policies somewhere, and the policies say some more legalized version of when you're on our systems, it's our systems, our data, your computer is our computer, we can search it, we can do whatever we want under basically no limitations. If you don't like it, don't put like your personal data on our computer, basically. That's kind of what it comes down to. In the EU, it's very different, and you need to be, if you go and investigate something in Europe, you're investigating bad action, you need to be justifying, well, maybe not necessarily on paper, but at least in your head to make sure you're within the grounds of the law, every step that you have to make sure, okay, well, just because it's on our system, do we have a right to look at it? I mean, are we doing it in a way that's privacy protective? It's much more complicated, and so this convergence has, I think, huge impacts for the intersection of these disciplines, because right now in the U.S., privacy in the employee context is like, it's a more kind of policy and ethics than it is law, but that would change the more it looks like GDPR. So this is just a laundry list of statutes, and the point to be drawn here is that in the US, there is no GDPR, there is no overarching data protection law yet, but there are many laws. There are state data breach laws. They're not really privacy laws, they're data breach laws. They're focused on something bad happened, you have to tell people. And then various states have something that's a little more like security or privacy laws, particularly California. And then there's sectoral laws at the federal level. There's HIPAA for healthcare data. There's Gramm-Leach-Bliley for financial data, et cetera, particular laws trying to solve particular problems. So now we have our fun Venn diagram. So I wanted to give you some examples of questions here that kind of fit in these various categories. So core privacy question, can this data be given to a third-party marketer? So it's not really an identity management question. You can sort of feel that there are questions in the other disciplines that are sort of lurking in the background, but the question itself is a privacy question. Can we give this data to a third-party marketer? Do we have permission to do that? Do we have consent or whatever we would need under the prevailing legal regime? And then you get into a core cybersecurity question, which is a question about our cybersecurity defenses. Again, there would be privacy questions behind that. Well, how restrictive our firewall policy should be would depend in part on what's behind the firewall, how much do we care about it, but you get the idea. And then you have which contractors need an EID versus which will do stuff on their own, sort of core identity management question, of course. Again, others are lurking behind it, but that's the core of it. And then you get a question that sort of combines the privacy and cybersecurity. How do we protect our employee data from internal misuse? So the beginning of this question is a privacy question, really. What are the obligations around that? What's sensitive? Why is it sensitive? What can be done with it? What can't? And then the kind of answer to the question is going to be a privacy and cybersecurity answer, which is both a combination, of training and operational controls, as well as potentially cybersecurity controls, passwords, all sorts of things that you would do to segregate the data you have for the employees that need it from the employees that don't. Oh, sorry, I didn't see that. Okay. And then a question that combines identity management and cybersecurity. How do we manage access to our firefighter accounts? Checking them out, logging use of them, things like that, which is important for both disciplines. Then we've got who should be given access to a customer database. So you've got kind of a privacy question with an identity management answer. And then we've got the one that's all three. We just keep adding more words. How can we identify and stop misuse of accounts with access to our customer databases? So you've got the privacy question of why is this private? What are the interests of the people the data is about? What needs to be kept private in what way? The cybersecurity piece of it, what are the controls that we can use to limit this from internal or external misuse? And then the identity management question of how do we provision people correctly so that people we've struck the ever elusive balance of giving people enough access to do their jobs, but not too much access to give them the ability to be abusive. Okay, so now we're gonna go to the fun part.
Yeah. I think we need. So now we're gonna do some role playing. Now's the part where you're all gonna participate, and some people are gonna actually have to get out of their seats. So we have 3 scenarios, and for each scenario, we'd like one person to be the chief privacy officer, one person to be the CISO, and one person to be the identity management lead. So, for scenario 1, can we get a volunteer, please, to be the chief privacy officer? Someone? Anyone? Come on. I promise it'll be way more fun. If nobody volunteers, I'm going to start picking on people. It's not going to be fun. There you go. Thank you. All right. We have a chief privacy officer. Who's going to be our CISO? Someone? Anyone? Come on. I see you. Some of these people are excited. They want to participate. Let's go. You're the CISO. Vlad. Yeah. No, that's too easy. That's too easy. You're the CISO. Somebody who is a privacy or a security person in their real job, come be the identity management person. We want people to think about it from different perspectives. Okay. Come on.
There's a lot of security in people.
There's no embarrassment here. We're going to have your back. Seriously? Nobody's participating? There wasn't even there you go. Thank you. Now we have an identity management person. There wasn't even the big party last night. Come on. Tomorrow morning I'd be understanding it. All right. So the 3 of you, we're gonna talk through the scenario, and here's what we're gonna ask. So this is what you should be thinking about as come up. Come up. All right. Come up. Okay. And as we're talking through the scenario and we're asking questions, we want you to point where on the chart you think the decision is happening, or where the action is in what we're trying to figure out and work through, okay? And this very Price is Right, audience involvement. Yes, no, up, down, yell at them, tell them they're wrong, tell them why you disagree. We want this to be very participatory, okay? So be active, be vocal. Let's go. $1. There you go. All right. Here, why don't you read through the scenario?
All right, scenario 1, meet Janice. Janice works in a call center for a large U.S.-based e-commerce retailer that sells women's clothing and jewelry, among other goods. Last week, Janice had lunch in the company cafeteria with 2 coworkers who work in different departments at the company. Janice made a mental note that she liked one friend's shirt and the other friend's bracelet. She wanted to see if she could find these items to purchase them with her employee discount. The following week, Janice is having a slow day in the call center, and she remembers that she wants to find the shirt and bracelet. She visits the company website from her personal device, but is frustrated because after spending a solid 15 minutes searching, she can't find the exact items. Then, Janice has an idea.
I like the drama.
All call center employees like Janice can access the company's customer service database, which includes purchase history going back 10 years. Janice turns away from her personal device, back to her computer, and logs into the customer service database. She searches by name for the first coworker and can see all purchases, including the shirt Janice had been admiring and another of other purchases she likes. Janice writes down the names, description, and product numbers of all the items she likes. She repeats the process for her coworker's account. Janice returns to her personal device and purchases a number of items with her employee discount.
All right, everyone. Sorry. Everyone knows where we're at now? We got the scenario? Everyone knows what's going on? Okay. So question number one for the privacy officer, the CISO, and the identity management person. Are we concerned by this behavior, by what she did?
As a CISO, extremely concerned.
As a CISO, extremely concerned. Okay, okay.
Like she really likes that close, you know?
What?
So,
Is there a policy about it?
Okay, so we're going to get there. Do you have privacy concerns, identity management concerns? Yes? Can you maybe like...
So basically, okay, so from an identity perspective, my concern is that she's using entitlements that she may not necessarily have to have. I mean, accessing to the database is the question is whether she actually needs to access that kind of a database. Is that part of the role of her job?
Okay.
Okay, and if not, then why is she able to have that kind of access?
but she's a call center lady. She should have that access, right?
Not necessarily. Not necessarily. You know, exactly.
She has to get. I agree with you. The policy should be she has access only to the customer she's dealing with. If that
Exactly.
person is not her customer, she can't search it.
Exactly.
I agree.
Privacy concerns?
I was going to say something similar. Two-thirds of our company is customer support, and they're not supposed to go into an account unless they're in an active chat with a user and ask them, "Can I look at your purchase history? Can I?" Yeah.
Okay, so, thank you. So, so related to all these issues, how would the fact that she did this, or would the fact that she had done this, be discovered ever, right? Because is there, for your system that you're describing, you have to ask permission, you have to go in, but is there some way that's saying, oh, I can now see this person got a phone call in the call center from this customer, and so now we're gonna go look at their account. So the question is, would this behavior even be discovered in the first place?
I think our CISO
As a
has an opinion.
CISO, and as a good CISO, I have SIM. And I have a good SIM. And that SIM can tell me relationship between who did what. And since she went through my company, whatever, should be either network or Wi-Fi or whatever, I would be able to figure it out that she actually did it, if I have this policy turned on.
But what kind of a policy? Because she has the right to be doing that as part of her job.
Remember, she's using her private phone and her private device, right?
Sorry. So in the scenario, she goes to her work computer. In her work capacity, she looks up the other coworkers.
Oh, well, then again, if we have a policy about not having this customer as my customer, that could be a bad idea, right? I can discover activity, not only rights.
Okay. Oh, yeah?
My move. Oh, finally it's working.
Okay.
Hey.
I saw an idea percolating.
So we get where is my friend? my friend over there can maybe testify on that. The only way that we can discover that is that if at some point she put all the data she acquired into a specific file, and this file is found on a USB key or something like that, and then we can use the SIM to understand what she has done in order to be able to compile such a bunch of data.
Many different interesting things.
Okay.
And I think people are like getting on the fact that there's some part of like an a priori problem here, because if this is your setup and you've got customer service agents that are like rightfully able to access 10 years and they do it all the time, it's going to be pretty hard to figure out that she did this versus did this at a legitimate activity. It would be more of like a before the matter, like limiting this so that you'd be able to see this as being an out of band. But if your system is this open, it'd be pretty difficult to like be able to spot this.
True.
Yeah.
True.
Okay, so all that being said, we're really losing people. Okay, nobody wants to play our game. Where do you think on this chart, by color, like we call this orange, red, yellow, blue, orange, violet, lavender. I don't know.
Oh my God.
Yeah, I'm fancy. I'm fancy like that. Dark purple, light purple. Where do we think that we are sitting? What intersection are we at right now?
So from my perspective,
Yeah, shout it out.
I don't think it's in any of them.
You don't think it's in any of them?
No, I don't. I think this is a question of code of ethics at the end of the day.
Ethics, okay.
An ethics circle, I would say square in the middle of that
Okay. Do you not think that the ethics violation is perhaps also a privacy violation?
I think it's a question of conduct. So to me, utilization of ethics of do unto others as they would do unto you, that,
Okay.
that should equally apply to a privacy, identity, and cybersecurity realm. But the core underpinning is we're talking about how we treat others for personal versus professional. So to me, it's its own circle, and I think it sits as a framework underneath those three Venn diagrams.
Okay. Sorry, I should have brought you the mic first, but there was one other. That was very good. We talk all the time about how the baseline of a lot of privacy concerns in the absence of legislation is actually ethical concerns. Yeah, sorry.
So how does this change if it's not a clothing company, but it's a drug company?
Right. So are we less concerned because what's being looked at are clothing and jewelry orders than, say, pharmaceuticals?
So it's from my standpoint as a CISO, it's definitely all about risk, right? So I'm gonna definitely put the risk depending on what exactly we're looking for, what kind of data, right? If it's stuff close, that's one level of the risk. If it's drug, it's a very different level of the risk. So.
Should we move on? Oh. Okay. Good. I like it.
I want to challenge the idea that we can just assign levels of risk to categories like that. I mean, if you're a closeted kid in Alabama and the shirt you bought was a Pride shirt, that has potentially huge implications for you from a privacy and personal safety level. So yeah, not all clothing is created equal in that sense.
Excellent point.
Different level apply for different variables. As a mathematician, I can tell you, you can put more than one variable in calculation of risk. That's what I'm saying.
All right, let's move on to the next scenario. All right, we're going to just all keep you all up here. You're going to keep doing your role. All right, scenario 2.
All right, meet Kyle. Kyle is a senior programmer at a 500-person company. He's worked his way up through the company over the last 10 years, and management refers to him as an exemplary employee. His greatest achievement was building and maintaining the company's homegrown payroll system. Last month, the company made its annual promotion and bonus announcements.
Okay.
Yeah, Kyle was deeply disappointed to learn he would not be promoted and his annual bonus was less than what he thought he deserved. He's convinced he's more qualified than the other members of the IT staff that received a promotion. Last night, Kyle's family was discussing whether they could take a summer vacation. Kyle spent his morning commute trying to figure out what the family could afford, working himself up over his lack of bonus and promotion. When Kyle got into the office, he used his admin credentials to log into the payroll system that he built to do a search of all of his colleagues in the IT department. Because Kyle built the system, he knew exactly how to do a search for current salaries and bonuses awarded. Kyle sees these numbers and gets very upset. He's received one of the lowest bonuses in the department. Several newly promoted are now being paid much more than him. He storms into his boss's office as he thinks his loyalty to the company is being taken advantage of and demands a promotion, raise, and additional bonus. He begins to list off his colleagues' salaries and bonuses as examples. Kyle's boss asks how he learned all this information. She tells him he's immediately suspended from accessing any IT resources until further notice and an investigation is completed.
All right.
Wow.
Are we
Are we concerned? No, not at all. Okay.
All right, so let's start with I'll bring the mic to you in a second, but let's start with the same question after this comment. Let's start with the same question. How would this have been discovered? Would it have been discovered? It's a 500-person company, right? It's not a big global company with lots of different governance mechanisms in place. So how would this behavior have been discovered had this guy not basically blown his cover by storming into his boss's office and complaining about it? But yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, exactly.
I actually am concerned with his boss asking him how he had that information. because that opens the door to retaliation against employers who are discussing salary information, which is a very real problem that people have. If I were in that position, I might initiate an investigation behind the scenes, but asking that question, I think, is running a big risk.
Excellent points. There were other, should have worn lower heels.
Yeah, you put sneakers on.
Someone here, hands? Yes. Well, you can go.
I hope you're using a privileged access management system to track the use of admin credentials, and I think that's how it would be discovered. And you could actually replay the session when he logged in and see what he had done. So that's how I think it would be discovered, and I think an investigation is definitely necessary. Absolutely.
Yeah, I think we talked about this in preparation. This is kind of an older thing, but you've got this kind of homegrown payroll system, which, I mean, it just sounds like an absolute nightmare in so many ways. But first of all, why does he need the admin credentials? I mean, he developed it, sure, but should he be able to log in and do everything? That's not a great idea.
Administrators and users within the system itself, there should be an underlying behavioral biometrics algorithms to detect anomalies during the actual sessions. So it pops up not after for a forensic, it's actually in real time.
Yeah.
If your PAM system was properly configured, then a developer should not have access to production data anyway. He should have a break the glass and need to approval to get there. So the fact that he could actually access means your PAM is blown. So your company is not compliant.
So I wanted. That was a good question. Go.
We're a 500-person company with a homegrown system. Half of these things they might not even have ever even heard of.
Right. So that's why we put that number in there, was because there's a lot of good tools out there, but a company like this that's kind of hacked together this system anyway may not have a lot of let alone all the forensics and things you have to do to the system, which would be terrible. But there may be a lot of problems where they don't know this stuff, they can't afford it, their controls just aren't great, somewhat by necessity. Yeah.
All they might have is a director of IT that's just concerned about keeping the lights on, and if they're a 500-person company, chances of it, they've been flying under the radar for some of the security issues, and so it's just not even a mindset.
That's a good point.
So, with respect to who else should be involved, this is an excellent time to call your general counsel.
Yeah, that's a good point.
But there's another, especially in smaller companies, there's the insider threat, and then there's the insider threat, as it were. And what you've got now is a developer who, it's one thing for a customer service rep to look up a record that maybe they shouldn't have. It's another thing for a developer or an IT staffer, and I say this as someone in IT. If one of my folks, something like this was brought to my attention, I can't trust them from this point on. They're done, and they're gone. So,
I have a privacy question, and it's which scenario? We don't normally ask this question in privacy, but I think it's interesting. Which scenario, one or two, do you think is more of a privacy problem? Is it looking at the shirts, or is it looking at people's salary?
In my opinion, it is definitely one, because when you think about this information, this privacy is kind of company privacy. That's not privacy for a person. Everything related to salary or bonuses, that's the company information, nothing to do with me, all right? While the first one was actually looking at the behavior of a human, right? If I have a good behavior analytic tool and I would be able to do, looking into the privacy without telling you what's going on, I can sell that data away to somebody else. This one, it's one time. It's more about company than individual. That's my opinion.
I think it's a good point, and it highlights some kind of ephemeral nature of privacy, and trying to sometimes explain it. It sort of comes down to that feels gross to me. I don't like that, and it's sort of hard to put that in kind of quantify it or put something on it that can tell you sort of what level it comes down to. I think that's right because you sort of have an expectation that some people at your company know your salary. I don't really want everyone to know it, but like some people know it, certainly. Yes. It feels more uncomfortable that someone is going to go into and look at your purchases. When you go to Amazon, you may have a friend who works at Amazon, you don't expect that friend to know everything you've bought. If your coworker learns your salary, I didn't want that, but I kind of get it what might happen.
It's about the individuals who are involved, right? The first one, the employee who had the shirt, employees, right? As consumers, if they're using their consumer persona, they don't have there's probably not a privacy right that says employees of the company won't ever look at your shirt color unless you call them, right? You would never put that into your legal agreement, right? The right to see that information for employees of the company where you purchased, you likely have granted that consent, right? Which in the second case, clearly the individuals whose salary was reviewed, there was no consent. There was a right to privacy of that information internally. So I think in the first case, I'm not sure. I'm more on the side of this is an employee ethics problem versus it's a privacy problem. Because I can't imagine that a retailer would say in their privacy policy, people at the company can look at your shirt color, but only if you call them. It's probably all or none.
Yeah, I think it highlights that, as Heidi was saying, that you can think of, when we described privacy in the beginning of the session, we described it in a largely legal term. But it's more than that too. There is an ethical component to it because not everything is legislated, and a lot, thankfully, and a lot of it comes down to what's right to do, and especially in an internal situation in an employer. Some of it, we're the employer. We can legally do almost anything we want, but that doesn't mean that because you work here you should be subjected to that. Just like there's a lot of things that we don't want our employers to know that we don't feel like they have any business knowing, and it's a similar thing. So that you could draw an imaginary circle that connects privacy and ethics and sort of say this is in between. It's a privacy-driven ethical concern.
And I would just go back to the sort of where do we think this scenario lives on this chart? Are we in the privacy world? Are we in the identity management world? Are we in the cybersecurity world? Where are we in the Venn diagram for this type of behavior? Because I think that also drives, like you're saying, whether the general counsel gets called, who gets involved. There are a lot of cybersecurity issues that get handled, especially at large companies, just automatically all day, every day, and legal is never involved for better or worse. So where do we sort of sit in this Venn diagram for this type of behavior? Privacy and cybersecurity.
Yeah, privacy and cybersecurity.
I think there's IAM in there too, because I think once he built the system, he should have been kicked out of it. I think identity and access management should be in there because I think once the system was built, he should have been out. I implemented Workday at our company, and I was an admin for a while, but I was taken out as soon as the implementation was over.
Once it went, yeah.
Yeah, I didn't need to be an admin in there anymore, but that was our policy to take me out once that was done.
Yeah,
That's right. So it's I think, to be fair, in a small company with 500 people, you're almost always here, right? Because if you're a 500-person company, do you have a privacy person? No way. Do you have a dedicated identity management person? Probably not. Like you're saying, you probably have one person who's the director of IT, and they do all of these roles. You probably don't have in-house counsel, right? It's just people trying to get the job done and keep the business moving.
Right.
So I think that's also, Mike and I can tell plenty of stories about companies who call us for our digital forensics and incident response services, and the variation of sophistication that we get on the phone when we get the call varies widely, because many times if it is a 500-person company, all they know is, I think something's wrong, can we just ship you the laptop to take a look at it? Yeah. Really, we get those calls all the time. But we also get very much more sophisticated companies that have already conducted some sort of first-tier review and are saying, somebody's in our system, help us get them out, right? So there's a huge level of variety there in what you're seeing in this world, but depending on all of those things, it can push you to one or the other of these circles or one of the other of these intersections based on who gets involved and who gets called in.
All right, last scenario.
The security people will like this one. This is a good one.
Yeah. For those of you who stuck around, here's the big payoff. Yeah. Meet Adam and Kelly. Adam's the executive assistant to Kelly, the CFO of a company that helps customers raise their online profile through advertising, marketing, and SEO. Adam's company is known for being particularly aggressive in its use and development of data sets and strategies to target specific demographics. Kelly is preparing her quarterly presentation to the C-suite on the company's earnings, which typically highlights one or two customer success stories. As he does every quarter, Adam logs into the company's CRM financial systems and generates the reports Kelly needs to prepare her presentation. Adam is always amazed at just how much information he can see. He knows, for example, which of the company's customers are using the company's services to market to individuals who have specific political affiliations, professional memberships, or have a high net worth. Adam knows Kelly likes to see specific facts and figures. He makes sure to provide her with as much detail as possible. Adam downloads and saves the reports to Google Drive on his desktop, as he does every quarter. That folder automatically syncs to the cloud so Kelly can access it when she's ready to put her presentation together. Adam leaves the office to meet friends for dinner at a local restaurant. He leaves his laptop in his backpack in the back seat of his car, and you know what's coming next. After he returns from dinner, the door is ajar and the backpack is gone. Wah, wah. Adam immediately calls Kelly to tell her what happened, who immediately contacts the CISO to tell her what happened, or him in our case. All right.
All right, so let's go the other way around on this one. Right, so now we have, to recap, we have customer information, that very, very high, desirable maybe customer information, confidential customer information, like customer A wants you to help them target this demographic. Customer B wants you to help them target this demographic. It's on a laptop. We know it's local to the laptop, and the laptop's been stolen. Right? So where are we now with all of these facts? Where are we now in the chart, right? This is like a different type of scenario than the previous two that we've discussed.
Well, I almost say you're mostly in the cybersecurity realm at this point.
Okay.
It's honestly, there's one thing is missing here is data management, data access management, DAG, right? That should be a part of that too, because like when you are on the laptop of the company laptop, right, chances are, I'm CISO, I make sure, one, data is encrypted, right? So two, I have second factor to come in, especially this guy, because he knows a lot, right? So you can't just turn on the computer and just say, oh, yeah, I'm going to log in, or just take a hard drive out and kind of fix it because it's encrypted. Hopefully that's the case. But my biggest problem is Google Drive.
Right.
Because you can easily control, and this Google Drive, if I know that my guys are using Google Drive, I want to make sure it's company controlled also.
Yeah, we had this exact conversation.
So but usually, unfortunately, it doesn't happen that way. So that's the point.
So one thing we didn't specify is whether it was a commercial, like enterprise Google Drive, or whether it was personal Google Drive. So we sort of left that open for discussion because you can lock it down as the CISO as much as you want. And if your employees hate all your controls, they're still going to find another way to share the information they want to share. Sure. Yeah. Right? So we have a new character. Now you're going to be our general counsel. So what does the general counsel think about this? Does the general counsel think it's just a cybersecurity problem?
Well, the general counsel, so can we assume that this is a corporate G Suite, or is this something that they're working around?
Go for it.
Okay, so since my company's on a corporate G Suite account and I've got some ideas, they do business associate agreements and data processing agreements and GDPR modifiers. So provided it's corporate, I like the fact that the data was stored on Google Drive, because that gives me, I'm also assuming that the laptop is not encrypted, because if it's encrypted, we really don't care. I like the fact that the data's on Google Drive, because now I know exactly what was on the laptop, which gives me a way to scope, do I have PII on there? Do I have PHI on there? What, relative to my legal obligations, what data do we have, and where's the scope? So you also have an interesting, like a secondary privacy impact here, because not only do you have your customers' information, but you've got private information on third parties that probably don't know that they have your information. Yeah. So you've got a really kind of a nasty knot of, you're doing some notifications here, and pinning down who you're notifying could be really tricky.
It's a really good point about the backup, because anytime you have you have something that's been compromised, but you don't really know what was in it, from very little to maybe a whole lot. As a lawyer, you kind of get stuck thinking about this, like, well, what is our obligation? And the regulators don't love if you're like, well, we didn't report because I don't know what's on there. So you kind of get stuck at being like, we have to assume that like everything that could have been on there was, and it's a real nightmare to do that. So having a backup to be able to say, well, we know at least like this was not implicated, so that's something is good.
So I think that there's an identity management component here. The fact that the executive assistant and presumably the CFO had access to really granular data about what customers were doing. And when he went in, remember, she needs a report to the C-suite about how they're doing financially. So how many customers are spending X amount of money. She's not reporting to the C-suite, by the way, this customer wants to target high net worth individuals, or this customer wants to do this. So to me, that sounds like an access control issue about why are these people simply just provisioned access to the full database and able to also generate reports and extracts from that data through just the click of a couple of buttons. So I agree that the theft of the laptop pushes us into cybersecurity, but I think before we got to it being as big a concern as it was, there was an identity management piece that needed to be addressed as well. And again, we could spend the next 3 hours telling war stories about the calls that we get for incidents exactly like this, where somebody says, well, why did that person have all that data in the first place? And it just happens to be the way that the access rights are structured at a lot of these companies, where people say, well, I need information for these pieces, so we'll just give you everything.
And there's a complex both security and identity management component to this. So the higher up someone is, the harder this conversation gets. A low-level employee, you can say, you do this one thing, and so you get this access, and why do more? But you can imagine the CFO or a CEO or someone high up saying, or a CIO or head of IT, I need access to everything. And this shows that that by sort of being less restrictive there, you've created this massive privacy and cybersecurity problem. And it wasn't really about saying no, CFO, we don't trust you with our data. We do, you're the CFO, but because you got too much data and pulled this in, we've now had this massive problem that we wouldn't have had if all you were seeing was, this customer and high-level financial, this customer, high-level financial. It wouldn't, the general counsel problem would be much simpler.
And to that point also, we often talk a lot of times about data breach notification obligations specifically for personal information, whether you're under the GDPR or whether you're in the US. But this has the potential to trigger contractual notification obligations, because a lot of times in the B2B space, there'll be notification obligations for a breach of confidentiality. So this company is trusting you with their confidential information about who they want to target. That's separate and apart from the individuals who they actually end up targeting. Just the fact that they're going after a specific demographic is in and of itself confidential information. So it gives the general counsel a different type of headache, because now you're not worried about complying with 50 state data breach notification laws. You're worried about making 50 separate customers really, really angry at you.
It's closer to 53 or 54 separate regulations.
Yeah.
Oh my God.
Especially if you're in HIPAA, yes. Yes, your life gets more complicated. So we are miraculously perfectly on time at the end of our session. If anybody has any questions, we'd be happy certainly to take them. But otherwise, thank you very much, everybody, for participating. Thank you to the three of you for standing up here the whole time. Thank you very much.